In this section, we're going to be going over some of the basic fundamentals of how to work with Unity. While you can skip this section if you're already familiar with Unity, I find it's also useful to go back to the basics once in a while to reiterate on things that you may already know. Now, in this section, we're going to take a look at Unity's interface, the windows that it has, and the menus involved in them. We're going to learn how to move about in the Unity editor, how to move ourselves, as well as objects in our scenes, as well as organizing our files to have the best workflow that we possibly can. So with that, let's get started. For this first video, we're going to be exploring Unity's interface, windows, and menus to become familiar with how it works. Now, specifically, we're going to take a look at the project window, the hierarchy window, the scene view, the toolbar, the game view, and the inspector. So with that, let's get started. So as you can see, we're right into Unity here. And the first thing that I want to point out to you guys is the project window, or also known as the project browser. And this whole section of Unity is basically a list of all of the objects that are contained within our project. We already have some folders here already from the assets that we imported from the asset store. And it works fairly similar to how Windows Explorer does. We have folders. Selecting the folders on this left side shows the contents on the right side. You can select things from here or inside here, and each object has different information about it. Say, for example, if I go to this materials folder, if I select this object on the right-hand side in the inspector tab, the inspector window, I have information about this object or about this material, the information used to draw it, whereas this is a texture and information about it will be displayed as well. Now, one of the nice features of working in the project window is if I know the name of an object that I've included here, I can use this search bar in the top right in order to find it. Say, for example, we want to open up the Sky City level that we talked about in the last video. I can just type in Sky City, and you'll see it. There's a number of options here, and I can select it, double-click it, brings me there. Or I can also type in here again, and it'll look throughout my entire thing, or just this particular folder. And if I double-click on this scene file, you'll notice on the bottom it also lists the file name and the path to get to this file. If I double-click on it, I'll be brought to this level. So now that we're inside of a level, or inside of a scene as it's referred to inside of Unity, I want to point out the hierarchy tab, or the hierarchy window, which you can see here on the left-hand side. Whereas the project window has all of the objects for all of our levels, the hierarchy contains things that are just for this particular level. And you can see that there's a number of objects that this level has. Now, the hierarchy tab also supports an idea called parenting, which we'll talk about later on. But for right now, I just want to point out anything that we want to have inside of our level is going to be located here. And if I were to double click on any of these objects, the scene view would change to go to that object. So I'm going to double click on my Hero HD Weapons object here. You'll see that my camera now moves to where my character is. Now, the scene view is also where we will take the objects in our hierarchy and place them in the world where we want them to be. Similar to how a level editor works in some popular titles. Now, I next want to point out the top section here, and that's what's referred to as the toolbar. And the toolbar has a lot of commonly used functionality that we're going to see a lot of. Now, I'm not going to dive into all of them right now, but just to give a basic overview, the top left here is our transform tools, which will allow us to translate, rotate, or scale an object. There's also a rect tool, which is used for 2D stuff. We have the pivot section here, which allows us to change where our tool handles are placed. The middle section here is what we're going to be using the most often, and that allows us to play the game or unplay the game, pause it, as well as step through one frame. The next section is Unity's collaboration tools as well as their cloud services. We have a section here for you to sign in to your Unity account. We have the layer section, which allows us to turn on and off the visibility of different things. And last, we have the layout section, which allows us to customize the layout and the looks of our Unity editor. Next, let's talk about the Game tab, which we can access by either clicking on this tab here or by actually hitting the play button to actually play our game. Now, this view is exactly what our game is going to look like. Now, to enter the game, to be able to move things around, I can click, and I'm now in the game. I can look around, I can move around, and we'll talk more about how this works later on. But if you press the escape button, we can exit out, and pressing the play button will have us exit. And we'll move back into the scene tab here. Now, the last tab that I want to talk about is this top right section here, the inspector window, or the inspector tab, as I'll sometimes call it. Now, previously, we saw that the inspector filled out with information when we selected an object from our project browser. But that's not all it can do. If we select a game object by either the hierarchy, by selecting it from a list, or by selecting it in a scene, you'll see information pops up on the right side. Now, you heard me mention that each item here on the hierarchy is a game object. And a game object is basically a container for pieces of functionality. In this case, we call these pieces of functionality components. And the inspector tab shows us all of the components that a game object has. The inspector allows us to modify the values of these components so we can easily tweak them. Like, say, for example, I select this garage wall. I can go in and change the position of this object in the x-axis from being at 23 to 10 by just typing it in here. And you'll see that it's been shifted over like this. And I can Control Z to undo this. I can also select any of these properties, like this Y section here, and you'll notice that there are two little arrows popping on each side. If I were to click and hold down on this and drag it to the right, it increases the value of Y, which moves this object up. And if I move over to the left, it moves this object down. Now, this can be really useful for if we want to tweak and or modify things, but that's not the only thing that we can modify. We can modify the materials that an object uses by selecting it from a list. As you can see here, it'll change, and many other things as well. And we'll dive into how it works while we're building our project.